Hundreds of thousands of researchers around the world are working to improve life and address imminent threats to humanity. Often their research ends up in the scientific valley of death in the form of publications and patents that never see the light of day. That is about to change. Welcome to the Lab to Startup podcast, hosted by Naresh Sunkara, founder and executive director of the Berkeley Postdoc Entrepreneurship Program at the University of California, Berkeley. This show has two main goals: share the stories of those who have successfully founded startups based on their own research, and highlight resources needed to help those aspiring to launch startups in the deep tech space. Whether it's electric cars, vaccines, addressing climate change concerns, or possibly establishing life on other planets, Naresh and his esteemed guests want to help scientists, engineers, faculty, and researchers bring their innovations to market. Learn more and subscribe today at labtostartup.com. And now, here's Naresh.
My guests today are Liam Berryman and Lance Brockway, the co-founders of Nelumbo. Nelumbo is a startup developing an advanced materials platform focused on improving the energy performance and minimizing corrosion challenges with heat exchangers in air conditioners, and also mitigating icing on outdoor units and refrigeration. The technology was initially developed at the University of California, Berkeley. In this episode, we will talk about the need for anti-icing technologies, the solutions they have developed, and the impact the adoption of this technology could have on the environment. Since this is a problem that the whole world is trying to solve, we will explore the challenges in adoption of such technologies, funding that help them get off the ground, and the team that is driving their mission. We will take a deep dive into partnerships that develop to bring the product to market as well, because partnerships are very key in bringing deep tech to the market. Liam and Lance have been good friends of mine for a very long time. Liam actually dropped out of his undergrad from UC Berkeley as he started working on Nelumbo and actually forgot to go back to school. We will talk more about it, but I'm hoping you would enjoy this conversation and learn from the experiences as well. All right, guys. Liam, Lance, welcome to the show. Let's set the stage for the audience by talking about the big problem that you're solving at Nelumbo. And maybe you can start with the name. Why the Nelumbo? And I know that it's the Indian lotus, Nelumbo nucifera. Let's start there and go into the solution afterwards.
Sure, Naresh. And first of all, thank you very much for having us. We're really excited to be here. So the name Nelumbo is the Latin root of the lotus leaf. And when we started Nelumbo, the company, we were primarily and only focused at that time on doing extreme water repelling surfaces. And we'd invented this way to create very small micro or nanostructures, like microscopic structures on surfaces that mimicked the way that nature has created these structures on plants like the lotus leaf over many, many millions of years. We'd figured out a synthetic way to do this, and we were primarily focused on that water repellency to create various effects on different surfaces. And I'll hand it to Lance to kind of introduce the problem.
Yeah, so I can kind of chime in as well. So that's the biomimetic nature of where we came from and the roots, and it's kind of also guided how we've expanded into other markets as well. And kind of take it as principle is learn from nature, not combat it. So with the roots of the problem, that kind of goes back to the history of the company. Could start in that realm as well. Is really as we started as a UC Berkeley spinout, where we were initially targeted at solving the problem of sustainable materials for applications in HVAC, so heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, primarily in Singapore. So they would like to target earlier than the rest of the world these zero net buildings. And we were part of a research team that was working on that. So we developed these materials to solve a condensation and later ice problem in heat transfer surfaces is where we've targeted from the beginning.
And over time, we really started out with this condensation problem. But over time, we learned a lot and pivoted a lot and made a lot of iterations and have become focused on two very significant problems. The first is that the formation of ice in systems that we use in homes and businesses all over the world, is really one of the key bottlenecks stopping us from achieving net zero environments. So solving this ice problem, getting it off of materials more quickly, can help us better get to a net zero built environment, which is a super big and very important problem. And the second problem that we focused on, that I actually discovered that this technology could also be used for, as we went through the process of experimentation early in our history, is creating extremely waterproof and breathable fabric or flexible materials without relying on harmful or toxic chemistries. The problem that exists today is that we use what are called fluorochemicals or perfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, pronounced PFAS, in millions of products all over the world. They're required to get the level of performance that customers expect. But these chemicals are now fundamentally known to be carcinogenic, so they're cancer-causing, immunosuppressive, so they make it easier to get sicker. And they actually are a lot of studies now showing that they lead to declining fertility, particularly in men. So there's a really big need to get these materials out of our products, and there haven't been any good solutions to achieve high-performance, waterproof, flexible fabric materials, which is something we've been able to do.
Wow, fascinating. Before we go further, let's stick to first principles. What do you mean by net zero environment?
Achieving an environment where all of your inputs are coming from renewables, which typically also means you need to significantly reduce the amount of consumption that's occurring today. So it's a combination of renewables with energy storage, with making sure that we have a lower footprint per amount of use or per amount of capacity from what we do now. The way ice affects this problem is that as you build up ice, you have a dramatic drop off in the energy efficiency of a product. So you're consuming much more energy to do very little cooling work in your building, whether it be a building or a car or a refrigerated trucking item, or any of the many areas that we use refrigerated or low temperature air conditioning. And in addition to this, ultimately that ice causes a shutdown of that system. So you actually have to fully turn the product off and do things like hot gas defrost or electrical defrosting mechanisms to remove that ice from the system. So it's a very simple thing, ice, but it causes this huge run of different issues with these systems. It increases their cost, makes them harder to use. It makes them harder to deploy in certain regions. So heat pumps, one of the primary air conditioning systems, can't be deployed in many regions because they don't function in these low temperature outside conditions. And so we're still reliant on normal gas-based furnaces, for example. So that this ice is still actually the key bottleneck from achieving heat pumps to become, or enabling heat pumps to become rather, enabling them to be used, which is part of the electrification movement. So there's kind of several different ways in which getting to net zero is blocked by this ice problem.
Give us a sense of the scale of the problem. It could be economical figures, time, effort that goes into solving the problem the older way, and we'll come to your solution. I think that'll be a nice segue.
Yeah, so with regards to the heat pump problem, ice is a known heat transfer bottleneck, and it prevents the adoption of heat pumps in really cold climates. So they can't be sold, let's say, in like Minnesota area, or if you're in Asia and like Hokkaido. These areas require different technologies to deal with the low temperatures and with the ice. So that's one way. So we can enable larger adoption in markets. The other way is we believe we're a lower cost option to reduce the barrier for heat pump adoption. So there's a lot going forward for heat pumps now. There's cities like Berkeley that have banned gas in new homes. So electrification is a must, and reversible heat pumps are the way to do that. So within that problem, our solution addresses that at both levels, and that's just stationary. We can do similar things in refrigeration, refrigerated trucking, home refrigerators, industrial systems. And more recently, one that's interesting to us is the application of heat pumps into the automotive industry. So with the electrification movement, you can no longer use the heat from the engine to heat the car. So other methods are now needed. And Tesla's leading the pack now with their automotive heat pump systems. And these ice problems will still manifest in these, which will reduce range and reduce cabin comfort for the occupant of the vehicle.
Wonderful. And again, is there an economic figure that you can attach to the problem? How is the world solving the problem right now?
So the world compensates for the problem. So we're one of the first anti-ice technologies for heat transfer surfaces. We could go into more detail about that later if needed, but typically it's done now by just designing the system to be larger. So if you have a heat transfer surface, the fin spacing is different. You compensate for oversizing other components and you rebalance the system to deal with it. But really, the problem has been avoided to the point where it is now a critical bottleneck for adoption for these systems. And there really are no other good solutions for ice prevention.
On the economic side, it's a little bit hard to tell because each OEM will be able to deploy this in their own way, and they're really the experts in system design. But we're talking about billions of dollars worth of HVAC systems that we could pull cost out of and open up markets for. And then if you want to look at the impact side of this, in the numbers that we run, we see greater than 1 to 1.2 gigatons worth of carbon dioxide equivalent or direct carbon dioxide emissions that we can avoid over the course of the next 30 years, given the adoption rates that we expect for both heat pumps and then for our technology as we move it into the market. So this is not a small opportunity, particularly on the heat pump side. If we then transition a little bit and talk about the fluorochemicals opportunity, again, challenging also there to say exactly economically, we're cost competitive with what's out there today. And we're providing something that nobody else can, which is an opportunity that is not based on these fluorochemicals. Our estimates now are saying, I think we can do more than 100 metric tons per year of this fluorochemical material avoided or averted from the environment, which if you think about it is really an incredible amount, given how much of this goes on to every single product. So that number can be far bigger. That's just looking at what we're assessing in apparel today. We want that number to be bigger. There's more work to be done to make that happen.
Great. Thank you for framing the problem. I think it's hard for normal people like me to imagine the scale of the problem. I just wanted to make sure the audience gets the scale of problem that you're trying to solve. Thank you. And that's a nice segue into the solution you guys came up with.
So this is really a coatings technology originally developed at UC Berkeley. Lance is the primary inventor, and him and I were working together in the design for nanomanufacturing lab under Professor Hayden Taylor. And as Lance mentioned, that was part of a program that was in joint venture with Singapore that was looking at designing more efficient cooling systems for the tropics. So we were on one of the only teams in that program actually that was looking at solving this problem from a materials perspective. And the solution we came up with is this coatings technology. The thing that's really special about it is by changing the settings of our manufacturing process, you could say, we can affect different micro and nanostructures relatively controllably that get deposited on surfaces, which sounds pretty arcane, but the difference is you can tune a material to have it create various different properties, from extreme water repellency to extreme frost and ice resistance, to corrosion resistance, to antimicrobial properties. And this coatings technology is, of course, just one way to approach the solution to these problems. But because it is a chemistry-based approach, we're using low-cost commodity inputs, and our process turns them into a high-value, high-performance coating that solves a problem for an overall system or an overall product, and is therefore a much more competitive performance relative to cost option than doing a redesign of the equipment or changing the mechanical design. That's been done for a very long time in these industries. You typically can only get a 1 to 2% gain in performance, and you have a lot of cost to put into retool. So we can really offer a much better bang for your buck option. And it's because we've taken this lesser known road of taking the chemical-based approach to try and solve these problems.
Wonderful. When you talk about solution and the chemical coating in this case, are you talking about applying it to existing infrastructure, or is it going to be a part of new products that are going to be built?
Yeah, our current approach to the problem is to put it in new installations. Retrofit has tons of challenges in that every system is different. We don't know the condition of the part, and we're not really field applicable. So we're more of a process technology in that we would need to bring the component to our coating process line, then ship it back, which puts challenges for the retrofit market. So we primarily work on the new installs by partnering with downstream supply chain players.
Walk us through a typical interaction. This is a new technology when you're approaching customers. What does that process look like? And how much do you have to convince them? The reason I ask that question is I'm assuming people know about the problem, and did they not have a good solution, or is it the cost that was preventing them from adopting or looking for technologies like this? What was your experience like, and how did you get them to adopt your technology?
So everyone acknowledges that ice is a problem. And systems as complex as HVAC systems, quantifying the problem and separating it from all the other cascading issues and what it could do to the system is challenging. And there's also misaligned incentives within this industry. So everybody has a different exact problem that they want to solve. So we've learned over time that it's best for us to partner with the actual manufacturers of these systems And by doing so, they know how to value the problem much more than anyone else in the supply chain. So that is a few years of learnings there. I have no idea who even to talk to within this area. And then to be able to communicate the value that we can provide and work with them for them to capture the value within their systems.
You're talking about partnerships was a better way to go to the market, I'm assuming in this case. Was it always the hypothesis when you first started? Did you guys think that we're going to build this product and do it ourselves? Or was partnership always a part of your business plan?
We figured out pretty early on that for companies in, let's call it hard tech or deep tech or science-based technology, however you want to describe it, for companies in this kind of place, if you are providing an element of a larger technology or product stack, there's only a couple of business models that really make a lot of sense for getting to scale. And one of those is the partnering method. The thing that took us more time to figure out was really which parts of the value chain should we be partnered with in each of these scenarios? Because, there's plenty of kind of business school studies out there of what supply chains look like. And tends to be a pretty simplistic box diagram in PowerPoint. And then you really get into an industry and it's like not at all like that. Some people are customers and suppliers. Some people sell to both. Sometimes competitors want to work together because there's some objective that they both share. I mean, it's all over the place. And so learning who to partner with and why and what the actual nature of the transaction would look like took us some time. And that was actually something that, looking back, I would say that would be advice I think we would give to others, is map that out as early as you can with on the ground, like boots on the ground information, right? It's things you learn yourself, and find base reality if you possibly can in these industries.
Partnership is something that comes up again and again because this podcast is all about deep tech and partnerships are big. If you don't mind, I'd like to dig deeper into what was the first partner like? What was that interaction and how long did it take for that partnership to form and what convinced them? And if things fail with other partners, I want to look at that angle as well. What did not work with those people?
Yeah, I mean, partnerships, it's tough because this is such a big term. There's so much that can fit in this. Partners can be anything from, and I'm sure the viewers, on this have seen this and heard this, and probably from other folks on the show. It can be anything from someone that's partnering and making an equity investment to somebody that's partnering and is going to buy your product, to someone that is a true partner in a let's form a joint venture and build a new business together, and every flavor in between. And we've seen both for us, we've experienced several partnerships, and other companies that we know have, in the combination of those two, we've seen many of these now. It is really kind of all over the map as far as success versus not success, how to set these up, the speed at which they go. Some of the things that seem to be fairly constant are that it does take a significant amount of time to get things started relative to the expectations and timelines of a small company in the deep tech space. And so you really need to properly budget for that. And another constant that we've seen is that the motivating factors are super important to understand, because those seem to be indicative of how quickly it will ultimately go and whether or not you can get to success. And the thing that's kind of the painful truth is that in some cases, there'll be individuals and companies that have a motive to do some sort of deal, maybe because they have budget, maybe because they're looking to move to their next thing. Maybe, there's a bunch of different reasons why. And that may not be long-term aligned with the startup. So you just need to be aware of that. Pass it to Lance to talk.
I was going to more give a little background and then frame it to Naresh as a question in this case, right? Because I found a lot of similarities from a partner selection to picking your PhD advisor. If you throw in, we've picked our school, we know what school we're going to, now we've got to select our advisor. You could say that's the company and the champion that you're dealing with.
If you can go into the nitty gritty, take the toughest partnership that you had to work with. If you're comfortable with naming the partner, that's fine. But I just wanted the audience to understand what it took for you to convince a tough partner.
I mean, for me, it's always, I won't call out any partner names. The ones we have are all confidential at this point. It's really about a small startup company trying to partner with, say, a giant Asian conglomerate. The people are different. There's different structures to the company. The average age of the person at the company is different. And then you have the cultural barriers and then the speed at which these companies move. You have all of these really existential barriers that you have to try to overcome and you have to come to work with. And it's these things that make things challenging. How we've dealt with this is, right, it's good to have people that know the culture or where you're doing business, right? We've brought in some Asian investors to help us deal with this, to help us equate, to make intros at the right people, to show that we're not some fly-by-night entity. We've been around for a while, and we have investors that you know. We've brought in advisors, we've brought in consultants, and it never hurts just to show and knock on their door, just to know that you're serious. I mean, COVID has kind of slowed that down a little bit. I mean, these are things we've done to kind of overcome the challenges, to get people's attention, to get the relationship started.
Yeah, in the case of partners that we've really, and I definitely agree with Lance that the COVID has slowed down some of these relationships, because it's, even in the day and age of video calling, it was still always impressive and move the ball forward to tell someone, to have a call and then say, I'll be at your location next week, even if it's in Europe or it's in Asia and you're coming from the US. There's only so many of those you can do. I mean, I'm not necessarily I am advocating that, but it's not for everybody. It definitely delivers results faster to just be, one could say it's aggressive in that manner. For us, in the cases of partners that we've been successful with, after we've gotten to know them, we've literally had a map of what it looks like internally in that organization, who all of the people in that organization are, what their relevant responsibilities are, what their reporting structure is, and then what the actual reporting structure is, who is really the one that's making the decisions. I wanted to follow up on something you said earlier. It's not just about convincing them to do a partnership, quote unquote. There's actually a huge amount of follow-on that needs to occur after that. And that's actually the most important part. It's not easy to convince someone to do a deal, but the execution of the deal and the relative success or not of it is way more important in the long arc of the company. So that's what you have to be really carefully consider who you're going to business with. And then the last thing I would say is, we have this map of what everybody in the company does and where they're positioned. And we basically have a almost one-for-one relationship set up with every one of those people, with people in our company. Now, sometimes people in our company are managing several different relationships, but in every case, it's a one-on-one relationship so that they know there's a relationship that anyone in that company that we need to know about us, they have that person that they can go to, that even if it's the middle of the night, our time, they know that they can call and talk to us. That's really important. It goes to what Lance is saying about establishing that we're real and that we're not just going to disappear tomorrow, which is hard as a small company to do, but very necessary.
That is fascinating. I really like this. I think I'm hearing this for the first time from most of my startups, that one, in-person meetings are still very effective in a business like this. And second, mapping out who in the organization is responsible for what, and actually connecting them, somebody from your company to their company, and put a face for those conversations. And I think that builds trust, and somebody in the technology can just talk to Lance and somebody in the business can talk to Liam, and so on and on. But I think this is a great piece of advice. Thank you for sharing that.
I heard this once a long time ago. It's a very broad brushstroke thing. It takes 7 meetings with somebody from the first time you've met them to get to a closed deal. 7 meetings. I'm pretty sure that number is longer in video call world, but it's actually been pretty consistently correct for us, like surprisingly so, for the in-person meetings, which, if you think about it, you're at maximum going to have an in-person meeting with an international company once a month, maybe once every 2 weeks if you're really pedal to the metal. So that means that if you really want to get a deal done, you're not even minimum of 6 months, but more like 9 months from getting a deal done from the first day you meet someone, if things are moving along according to pace. And you need to have something new, a new update, more progress in every one of those meetings. So whatever you can do to keep getting back in front of them, to have more progress. All these companies are tracking trends over time. They're not going to make a decision based on just a snap.
Wonderful. I'll keep that in mind the next time I try to build my next startup. Have you seen the customers evolving in this space from 10 years ago to now in terms of adopting? Are they more welcoming? Have things changed? Has it been easier apart from COVID?
I'll just leap us back to the textile segment, right? And it's one of these things that's really powerful in that the regulation of PFAS, particularly in the US, is lagging compared to the European Union. But there's this really powerful change agent in like consumers where they're demanding that we want no more fluorochemistry in our products, which has caused everybody to scramble, not quite at the last minute, but pretty close, to look for solutions to this problem, however it can be. So I need to maintain my product performance while also satisfying this consumer demand of more sustainable materials. Textiles, for that reason, particularly like outerwear brands that are aligned with like nature, are moving quickly, and they have to in order to satisfy the consumer. So it's really market driven in this case. So that makes our life much easier in that market because everybody's interested in a solution for this well-defined problem. On the industrial side, the climate movement is affecting different companies at different paces. depending on where they lie in the value chain and what jurisdiction they're in. So that definitely varies, but European industrial companies are very, very serious about their ESG initiatives. There is change for that to make better, more efficient systems. And then if you factor in our other value propositions, we're the lowest cost way to do that, it drives our business forward as well.
Are there specific countries in the world that are adopting technologies much faster than others? Anything that surprised you?
Most first world countries seem to be adopting faster than the US.
Right. The European Union as like a bloc are moving and setting very stringent targets. You take the Germany, France, primarily is where most of the industrial stuff would be there, are moving very quickly, way faster than the rest of the world. US is lagging. Australia is far behind all the political stuff there. And Asia, they're making the proper investments and doing a little bit different style for the incentives there. But it's less regulatory, more investment-based to be technology leaders.
In the US, is it the same because of policies, or is it investment that is hindering them from adopting such technologies?
Well, without getting too much into it, because we're by no means experts and we're only commenting here from like two industries, but there's some distinct differences. Let's talk about HVAC stuff first. There's some distinct differences in the makeup of the US market relative to the rest of the world. There were some, I guess we could call them design decisions that were made a long time ago. And then combined with the 3 of the 4 biggest OEMs in the world have been US companies, and they've had a pretty successful run of being influential over policy. And so what that's meant is that around the rest of the world, they've sold products into those regions that complied with kind of local regulations as they advanced. And the US didn't necessarily do things the same way. Not all that's been bad from a renewability perspective, just to be clear. Only, there's pros and cons for sure. It means that the market here just looks very different for many system types. In this case, that happens to lend itself to not as much of a radically fast advance as we believe we're seeing in other countries.
Particularly for the HVAC market, adoption of new technologies in the US is regulation limited. The consumer will only buy the lowest upfront cost item. These dominant US companies, they sell what the consumer wants. They could make them 3 to 4 times more efficient overnight if they wanted to. They have the technologies. It's just market limited, which means we typically would need regulation if we want to drive the technology forward.
Was there anything that surprised you from your original hypothesis? When you first started the company, what did you imagine about customers, and how did that thought process evolve over the past however years? Anything that surprised you guys, or shocked you?
When we first came out, we were naive in thinking that people cared about efficiency savings, that efficiency was a strong value proposition. We quickly learned that very few people actually care about efficiency for efficiency's sake. If you can make something more efficient and save them money, they care. Usually in terms of upfront cost, usually not total cost of ownership. And we learned that was flawed, and we learned about all the misaligned incentives, particularly in this market, of why it doesn't necessarily matter. So we've had to reframe what we were trying to sell and what our value propositions were based on. So if you go into a market like HVAC, we can solve a problem for you and reduce your manufacturing costs, for example. And then they're like, let's talk. Because they can already make the systems 3 to 4 times more efficient. They just can't do it per dollar. So we have to get in to see what motivates them, which in turn is driven by what their customers are motivated by. And that's an HVAC, lower upfront cost.
That is kind of sad. I was just talking to one of the founder from a university and who are trying to create antibiotics and diagnostics, and there's no money in that space. And here she is trying to save the world. And what motivates them is something else, the government and the patients in the hospitals. I think that's a common thread I'm seeing in almost all of the deep tech startups. Thank you for all that. Let's slightly shift the gears. Talk about the foundation. When did this thought come up about founding a company? Tell me that story.
Love to. So, as I mentioned earlier, Lance and I, we both met each other actually and started working together in the Design for Nanomanufacturing lab at Berkeley. And we hit it off right away, became good friends, worked together on several different projects, some more promising than others. Pretty quickly got to a mutual understanding that actually both of us, and this is the reason that we were in that lab in the first place, both of us were interested in taking things we were working on and going and getting to commercial impact with them. We wanted to be building businesses and changing products in the real world. The kind of academic lab was a launch point for us to do that. while we figured out, what the next steps were. And so at a certain point, it became very clear that Lance and I wanted to build something together. And one of the projects in particular became much more interesting from a technological perspective. It seemed much more ready. It was performing better than anything we found on the market or in other academic labs. And so at a certain point, we decided to apply to the Clean Tech University Prize, or the CUP program. It was the first time it had been hosted at Berkeley. It was a $100,000 pitch competition, if you will. And we ended up winning that first place and it was a winner take all, $100,000. And that was the first seed money that we were able to use to start getting out of the university. And we were super fortunate that we got involved in that program. We were assigned an advisor. His name's David Walther, Dave. And Dave had done his undergrad, his Ph.D. and his postdoc in Berkeley, mechanical engineering and combustion. And then he just recently spent 10 years as the first employee, actually, and then ultimately the SVP of engineering at a company called Cobalt Technologies, which is doing renewable fuels. He was there all the way through the company being sold to Solvay. When we met him, he basically joined as an advisor, and he was helping us out with all of the real world things that Lance and I didn't know because we'd only been in academic environments up until that point. And there's this one day where the three of us were sitting in this conference room, and there was writing all over the whiteboards, and there was paper, there's just stuff everywhere. And we were going through ideas, a million a minute. And it just became actually really clear in that moment that this is actually the co-founding team, that group of three. So all of us decided to do this full time. We all quit and left our respective things. A couple of weeks later, we won the Clean Tech University Prize. So that was $100K to the team. A couple months after that, we officially incorporated the company so we could set up a bank account and get the $100K. That's a whole odyssey for another time, is getting the money out of Cal after we had won it.
I can interject there and give you some advice. If you receive $100,000 from Cal, give them a penny back, because you cleared the threshold. It goes to UCOP, and you need a lot of signatures. So they get $99,999.99. You'll get it 6 months faster.
That was quite the adventure. We got the money. That allowed us to open our first facility down in Menlo Park, about an hour south of Berkeley. Open our first facility, work out a licensing deal with Cal for some of the IP that we wanted, hire our first team member, and basically get going. And then the rest from there is pretty widely available, but we did a $600,000 seed financing after that. And a couple of people that really believed in us early and invested in that were Jay Sato, who we met at Berkeley. He was a Berkeley grad himself and became an angel investor. Arno Harris and Bob Thronson really stepped up and made sure that we had first capital to get that round going. And then 1517 Fund came in and supported it. That seed financing, we were then really moving. That allowed us to hire out several team members, get to our first prototype stage. From there, it gets into more of the history of the company. But that's really the founding story. That's that first year. That covers most of 2016, which is the year that we founded Nelumbo.
Lance, for the audience, I don't think they'll know that Lance and I were postdocs at UC Berkeley, and we used to meet, and Lance used to talk about this glorious undergrad he had that was doing some great work in the lab. And then Dave came in. Here you have an undergrad, and you have Dave, who is also a PhD. Who convinced whom that you should form a company? Was it a lot of effort? And how was the process of picking a CEO come about?
So we're all quite different. So there's the realization that Liam and I really don't know much about manufacturing and real world stuff. And that's what Dave brought and all the experience there, because we had very little experience. But as Liam said, it wasn't really much of a discussion. It was kind of like a natural things where things just felt right. And I can double down again on the comment I made previously, is it's all about people. It's the people you work with. Let roles be roles. That's what it comes down to. You've seen the statistics. What kills the most startups? Founder mutiny, right?
Founder mutiny, yes. So
just sure that you get a good founding team and don't found a company yourself. I think you've heard me rant about that in other venues. But
yeah, it felt very natural from the beginning. Everybody wanted the same things. We wanted huge impact. Wanted and continue to want these things, huge impact, wanted to do something that was super valuable, wanted to see real technology, atoms, not bits in this case, get into the real world. And we all have unique and different skill sets, which is really cool. And so from day one, I don't think there ever really was a discussion of roles. We kind of just did what made sense, and then what everybody wanted to be doing and what everyone was already pretty, naturally good at and could learn more in, obviously. And since then, we've really developed into those roles, I'd say. I saw advice recently that, in the first like 1 or 2 years of founding a company, in some ways, like you shouldn't really pick titles. Everyone's just a founder. And then once you've actually hired a team, like you have the ability to call yourself a CEO or a CTO or an SVP of this or that. And that's good advice in some cases, right? Because when it's 3 people, you don't necessarily need 3 executives. But even though we did take those titles at that point, we didn't really operate like that. All 3 of us were doing experiments, cleaning the floors, raising money, talking to customers, whatever needed to get done, we were a part of it and continue to do that in many regards.
And Liam, you decided to drop out of college at that point?
Yeah, I mean, the official story, if you want that, is I was an undergrad at the time. I think I started with the intention of finishing. I definitely did. But then I was working with Lance for a year and we got things started. And at the time, I think I said to myself, I'm going to basically do this summer thing with Nelumbo, which we just named it that, I think. And the name was Lance's idea, so full credit to him. I said I'd do it as like an internship. And then I basically just forgot to
go back to school.
Yeah, I did. I mean, you emailed me like in January or something saying, where are you? And I just forgotten because, I mean, we were like, it was like so full time on this. And I was working with people that I really deeply respected, admired, and was learning a heck of a lot more from them than I was in classes. Not to say anything bad about Berkeley. It's amazing. I would go back for sure. But yeah, it was just the right thing for me to do.
What did your parents say when you went back and said, I'm dropping out of college, going into the startup?
I didn't say it that way. I basically said I have this opportunity. They were both really supportive. It's actually been interesting. It's gone from something that at the time was kind of strange to now seems to be very normalized, particularly in like software engineering. Chemical engineering might be still a little bit different.
That's still pretty rare.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there's only one other guy in my class that dropped out.
Dropping out of college and starting companies is a fancy story in the Valley. Liam, you're my first guest who did so.
Drop out of Cal. Those are very different.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's good. I can tell you the academic rigor there is.
Well, let's go towards the funding challenges. When you first started, how did you guys think about raising money? Just to give context to the audience, in 2005, the funding for clean tech was around $1.75 billion. And 2009 to 11 was about $45 billion. They say some greed, altruism, and policy had aligned to fuel the spectacular bloom. And there are a lot of things happen. 2008, China's rise in solar industry, natural gas, all of these led to a bust in this industry. I'm sure you're aware of like the funding levels. Like, were you scared setting out? What gave you that confidence that you can raise money in this space?
Good questions. So sure, we were scared. We just knew that we needed to do it. And we wanted to make the company real. And so we were just like, okay, we'll just figure out a way to do it. We didn't know what we were doing. I'll put it that way. When we first started, like raising money is definitely an art and a skill set. And we learned how to do it through many failures and some successes, and a lot of people willing to spend their time and help us figure out, learn the ropes. And we very much appreciate that those people did that for us. But it wasn't like something we were like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? It was more just the one thing we did know from early on was it's going to be more challenging to raise funding in this space than in other spaces. And so we're going to have to be more creative and more inventive and take longer. And that was pretty much true. And that was just advice that we got. And it was also gut instinct at the time because there was this looming previous boom and bust in clean tech. And there just weren't a ton of companies out there like us at the time. We'd spend the first 30 minutes of a lot of phone calls explaining what the heck an air conditioning system was. And again, a lot of that was we were approaching it the wrong way, and we learned how to tell a better story later on. There's definitely some luck involved with this. You have to meet the right people, and you also have to optimize so that you get the most chances to be lucky with who you're meeting and who you're talking to, who you're adding to the team, and who you're adding to your advisor roster at that point. And there's a lot of things that you can do. There's been a lot of good articles written on how to approach it. We weren't overly scared. We did know it was going to be more challenging. We didn't know how to do it, but we spent a lot of time talking to people that had raised money, got their opinion on how to approach it. And we got better and better over time. In each subsequent round, we did a better job and continue to move forward.
Sometimes it pays to be naive and to will something into existence, right?
That's definitely true.
Right? It's that naivety that's like, we can definitely do this.
Yeah, it's actually necessary. You must have it in order to start a company. And I think particularly a company in deep tech, if you actually know all the variables and you run the math on it, it doesn't look good when you start out on your odds, this and you're that. So the better strategy is truly to just ignore it, or even better, just to not be aware of what all the numbers are and just go for it. Each to his own. We're not necessarily advocating one thing or the other, but if you're going to do it, I wouldn't waste too much time trying to run your odds.
What were your first interactions with VCs like? And talk about the VCs too. What were their questions like? Did they evolve? I know you evolved in terms of ability to raise money. Have the VCs changed their questions from no, you won't be able to put up a business, to where are they today?
That's totally changed over time. And both of us can comment on this. We've both been in pretty much every fundraising meeting together. Early on, there was a combination of clean tech as a sector isn't interesting, which is now different. That's changed again, thankfully, and that's very exciting. Combined with what the heck is it that you're doing again? Clean tech's not an interesting sector, so you don't have VCs out there studying textiles, or at that time HVAC and deep industrial energy type of things. Combined with, as a third thing, first-time founders, which a lot of VCs have a bent against, implicitly or explicitly, whatever. I mean, they're just things you learn as a first-time founder that sometimes VCs don't want to be the ones. I think the phrasing is paying for you to learn those things. And then the fourth thing was both of us were young. I was particularly young. Both of us are still young, I think. So, but both of us were young and first-time founders and all the other things. So yeah, a lot of the early questions were, I can't remember anyone being overtly rude in any regard, but there were definitely questions that were non-helpful to assessing whether or not the business was going to be successful. We went through a couple show and dances that were more comedic than they were actual pitch sessions. We had people asking us, if I put this stuff on a Cheeto, can I still eat the Cheeto? We had more than one VC asking us, is this like that stuff from Christmas Vacation that he sprays on the sled and he goes down the hill? And
how do you respond to those people?
I like to think we take the higher in most of those conversations and just responded at face value, even though we knew that they were joking with us.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, like I said, we met a bunch of really good people. And in fundraising is just about building that critical mass, that momentum, because then you feel it. And then you're waking up every day feeling energized because you're like, oh, I'm so close. I think I can get this thing done. And, we had one person commit and then another person commit. And a lot of the early people probably were just committing based on their confidence in our ability, our team's ability to figure this out, knew that we were going to need change significantly. So yeah, a lot of early, both extremely positive and some somewhat negative experiences. And then, it's matured a lot to where today it's not people asking, do you guys know how to run a company? It's not people asking, do you guys know how to raise money? It's people asking, show me the metrics of your business, show me what's good about that and bad about that. Show me your plan for the next 5 years. How are you going to accomplish that? And all of the typical things that you would see in fundraising.
For those trying to raise money from VCs or anybody for that matter, are there signs that you picked up that he or she won't invest? Were there really helpful VCs in your case? What did that look like?
There's always signs like somebody's not going to invest. Hopefully they just tell you up front so they don't waste your time. But the West Coast thing, I'm not from the West Coast, where you can get the Silicon Valley no. It's a very known thing. It's like, call me back later. So it's just drags this stuff out. But yeah, there's generally signs. There's people that are interested. All VCs are different. Harp on it again. VCs are people. It's not just the fund. It's the partner you're talking to, the fund. You got to have buy-in and get them to sell to the partnership. It just depends on the person that you're dealing with and really some of their experiences and some of the problems that they want to solve in their life.
It's also the life cycle of the fund, how far they are in the deployment of an existing fund. Are they on fund 1 or fund 2 or fund 6? There's so many variables that VC as a category is hard to, it is actively changing right now. And then now in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been an explosion of micro VCs who are investing with very different incentives than your classic Sandhill Road VCs, both personal incentives and even the way the funds are structured. So, we could do a whole podcast basically just on that. But yeah, I think it is a numbers game when you're going through it. So meeting with as many people as you can, finding some way to have improved just over yourself from every meeting that you go to. And then, like Lance said, try and get to a quick answer in every interaction.
Just to close the loop on this, if you had a VC investing in a company, what was that best interaction like and how are they helping you?
That changes depending on where the company is at and what specifically you want. The best VCs are able to bring things beyond just the money that they're putting into the company. But I think the very best VCs won't try and convince you that they're going to totally transform your company, because that is kind of a red flag as well. And that's one of the ways that I've seen and experienced venture capital try to advertise itself to companies when they want to get into a deal. Most of the time, they just don't have the ability to be that transformative to your trajectory. And if they actively try to, they're changing too much. So the best ones that we've interacted with, it's very clear that they have a powerful network, that they have the ability to do follow-on financing, that they have connections to customers or other investors that are or partners that are interesting to you. And they can provide you specific examples of what they're going to do to help make the company better. But it's not couched in this expectation that they themselves are going to completely transform the trajectory of your company. It really you always need to be in a position as a founder where they're joining because they're so excited about what you're already doing, and it's going to happen whether or not they invest. It always needs to be in that context. Otherwise, the power dynamics get super wonky and probably unhelpful for both the investor and the company.
Indeed. As going through the list of some of your investors, and one stood out, the University of Tokyo Edge Capital. How did you end up working with them? Is it any different from other VCs, or tell me that chemistry?
Yeah, we loved working with UTech. They've been awesome, and both of us can talk about this. The partner we work with there is Kisuke Ide, or Case. He also sits on our board. He's been incredibly helpful. We've actually worked very closely with him. That's been super good for us. This is one of those things where early investors can make a big difference if you're using them correctly. So one of our earlier investors, Laura Smoliar, when she was putting together her fund, she got to meet Goji-san, who is the founder of UTech. He founded, I think, almost 10 years ago at this point, maybe longer. Before that, he was the guy that actually wrote the law in Japan that allowed them to form venture capital funds for the first time. So pretty cool, like literally started the industry of venture capital. He wouldn't say it that way, but I And so once he left the government position, he started a fund himself, and it's become one of the preeminent funds over there. So Laura met with him because he had set up this fund that was in partnership with the University of Tokyo. And Laura wanted to learn how to set up fund in partnership with Berkeley, which ultimately became Berkeley Catalyst Fund, who are an investor in Nelumbo. And so she had formed a relationship with him. We ultimately actually got introduced to UTech through a different angle, and I'd started diligence with Case, so they were interested in investing. But I think one of the things that really took it to a completed deal was Laura was able to reach back out to this contact and say, hey, this is a company I've actually been working with, and say some very positive things about the company and about Lance and I and the people on the team.
I can go further, right? It goes back. I mentioned Asian investors for Asian companies, and Japan is a good example of that. And shout out to Case. He's effectively our Japanese business development associate at this point, right? His value add there is very high. I make intros. He'll gladly join the calls with us that need translation. Like, he goes above and beyond what is required from his position.
Definitely above and beyond. UTech is a little bit, I'll say one more thing about them. They're a little bit under the radar if you're in the US because they are based in Tokyo, but they're really one of the most successful deep tech funds out there. They're on their fourth or fifth fund at this point, and they've successfully returned, and a lot of their companies have been acquired or gone public. So they're a great partner to work with.
Speaking of Japan, like, how are they in terms of technology adoption?
We work with quite a few companies in Japan to help bring it to market. They're much more willing to talk to people at an early stage, and they're typically more invested in like long-term outcomes. So they will take on something that they believe can affect their product lines much further than 18 months down the line, or giant US companies quarter to quarter type decision making. And it's that long-term view that makes Japan an ideal place for us to do business.
They're definitely much less concerned about quarter-to-quarter action than U.S. companies in that regard. And they seem to have had much more activity and investment in materials and advanced materials development relative to other countries or major corporations for a pretty long period of time.
It's not always venture money or angel money. You also got support from grants, right? Can you shed some light on the types of grants and the role they played?
Yeah, so I can go through the grants we've had. We can start off with the Clean Tech University Prize that Mia mentioned. That's $100,000 a seed, that smallest grant, but probably the most important grant that got the company off the ground. Afterward, Dave and I were awarded the Cyclotron Road Fellowship, which is now called Activate. I'd like to give them a huge shout out in terms of launching the best clean tech movement before it was cool to do so. Now they're in a really good position.
These guys are celebrities now.
Yep.
I'm trying to bring Ilan on as a guest. We are not able to find time, but he'll be here soon.
All the folks there have done a great job in support with the network. We consider that a grant. We used to tell Matt that we valued it at about $1 million. And he said, awesome. That's more than most people do. So it was critical, right, to get us in with the right people, the right community to kind of get everything moving in that direction. And then afterward, we got some more typical grants. We had one DOE grant for Rankine steam condensers. It was a little bit less than $1 million, which we partnered at Berkeley Lab on. And then since then, we've received a California Energy Commission grant for industrial refrigeration. I don't know how much, probably 2 million, 2.5 million, something like that. We have press releases on those. So people care to see what the scope is. But yeah, that money is important, particularly when the market is a little bit earlier stage and getting these hard tech things off the ground, because they're not like software where you make one prototype and then you copy paste $1 million times and launch the product. I'm not going to dumb it down, right? These guys I'll get phone calls. You have to make it, then you have to learn how to go to manufacturing, scale up, and all these other things. And that just fundamentally takes time.
This is all non-dilutive money. You're not giving up any equity.
Yes. The Activate program is 100% non-dilutive.
Very key to deep tech evolution and development, I think. Speaking of Cyclotron Road, are there incubators or accelerators that you guys were part of and that really help? And just shed light into like the kind of help you receive from those programs, like Cyclotron Road for that matter.
So the only one that we've been a part of that would be classified as an incubator, and they would not call themselves that because their business model is completely different and that they don't take anything. So they're there to provide support for the long term. What they bring is the fellowship money.
This is Cyclotron Road, right?
Cyclotron Road, Berkeley Lab fellows for 2 years, which is awesome. So it covers our salaries, makes things easier. They provide space within the lab. They provide Berkeley Lab and UC Berkeley collaborators. They've since expanded beyond that. So they're now at, I think, at Lincoln Lab at MIT, and they're about to launch a couple other things as well. So with that, they have a huge network. They're connected to everybody, and they're a good way to get within like the DOE or the DOD or the CEC and all of their sponsors. And their advisory network is very helpful for us as well, right? So people that sign up with them sign up with the companies in there. So if we needed to make a phone call, we can just route it through them and get in touch with a very large number of people that have been quite helpful.
That is so important. As an early stage company, your reach or access to such big partners is really impossible. You don't know who to contact, but I think that's an important role programs like Cyclotron Road play in the development. Take it to the future. What will it take for you guys to really accelerate in terms of policies or in terms of growth of the company? What is hindering you guys, and what is that needs to change in your opinion?
Great question. So I'll go a little bit back in time first. When we started the company, we had this first application in HVAC. We learned a lot about that, and there were a lot of changes that occurred. But we also knew that this technology to apply relatively high precision, but still extremely low cost nano and microstructure could be way more far ranging. And so we explored out pretty wide, with horizontal is one way to think of it, and looked at how this could be applied to a number of different industries. And that led to many new opportunities, of which we ended up refocusing on the one opportunity to solve ice in the HVAC space. And that is even significantly changed from where we originally started. And in the second opportunity space that we talked about of doing waterproof breathables for outerwear, particularly technical outerwear as a starting point. So we've gone wide, and then we've refocused on those two. You should expect to see from Nelumbo in the next 2 to 3 years is us bringing both of those products fully to the market and having them on shelves. And we're going to be doing this at a significant production volume. That's a big change from being in the R&D exploratory stage. And that takes a couple of years to really figure out where you're at and what your technology is best at, and being careful to not be holding a hammer and looking for a nail is the common refrain, to a situation where we're now in go-to-market and scale-up mode. We're working with the top brands in the world, working with the top OEMs in the world. We're in qualification processes with these folks. We're either in the field or going to the field, and in both of our examples. We know our first target markets. And this is now about that last step to purchase orders and scale up of production. Our full production today is at our headquarters in Hayward, California. where we're able to do pilot scale manufacturing. But the next step for us is a demo plant, so first small commercial plant that's able to fulfill first customer purchase orders in both of our businesses. That's the work cut out for us for the next 2 or 3 years, and we do intend to stay focused on these two opportunity spaces. Success in these allows us to then scale out and bring the platform to a whole list of other opportunities that we've already looked into and identified, as well as the people that call us all the time and say, can I apply this to this product or that product, which are opportunities we do want to access. But for now, it's about staying very, very focused on these two opportunities where we absolutely have the best competitive differentiation, we have the best product, it's got a strong profit margin, and we have customers that have said this is valuable and we want it.
What does competition look like in this space? Is there competition that inspires you to do better, compete?
We really don't pay that much attention to competition. I'll let Lance answer this one in a little bit more detail.
For the anti-ice product, we're realistically at commercial level first in class. There's nothing else there. So our competition there is actually other technologies for the system. So it's not like your typical, what other coatings? There's not any that do what we do. We're not a paint, for example. So it's really other system improvements that could solve the same problem. So what's the next fan motor or compressor or heat exchanger design that could make us less impactful, that could do so at a lower price point? That's kind of how we view the competition in there. And then we were one of the earlier movers in the outerwear space with the fluoro-free water repellency. And there will definitely be many, many players solving the same problem with different technologies there. We're just trying to get taken off with our first mover advantage and cascading through that.
Well, I hope you stay ahead. Is there anything about Nelumbo's story that we haven't talked about that you think is critical in terms of what makes it unique? Whether that's product or the team or the way you're building the startup, really any aspect of the business story.
I would just comment on the team. We've had an incredible time both building the team, getting to know the people that are here, and for many of them, working with them for several years. We've had extremely low turnover. Every financing round, I've had people send me something asking for the numbers on our turnover and like why employees left. And I've basically always been able to leave that page blank. And in cases where folks have left, it's either because the business changed direction and it just didn't make sense anymore, or they were pursuing an opportunity that was the perfect next step for them. We had someone that worked here for several years and then they got into their dream lab at Stanford for a Ph.D. and they went back to do that. It was Stanford, so it's hard to say that was the best call, but that's probably the right thing for them. My point is that we have had a really, really good run with this team. We think that the team is incredibly valuable and extremely good at what they do. They now, when people talk to them, they recognize them as forefront leading experts in these two respective fields, particularly the stuff that we're doing on anti-ice technology. Like we are at the bleeding edge of figuring out how to characterize, develop, qualify, and put those materials in the world and have them do things that are valuable. We're way beyond anything that's in an academic lab. And that's because of the stuff that our people have done here. So that they're understanding these materials and this technology at a level that just doesn't exist out there in the world. And I think they're extremely excited about bringing this to the world and building it for a long time to come. So I just want to say that about the team. That's what's been very special and unique for me.
I can kind of plug the problem a little further. We control the way ice crystallizes, the way it sheds. And some of the challenges are probably not too far off from like protein crystallization, where it's challenging. And that's what we work on and what we have our team that's driving a lot of this industry leading knowledge and bringing it to the market, right? It's important.
Yeah. Liam, what is it about the team? You're all first-time founders. Looks like you're doing a great job keeping that team together and keeping them inspired. What are the things that you did as a leader that built that culture in there? And talk about the culture. When did culture come into play and how did you grow that and how do you sustain that?
So first of all, about our culture, we basically focus on 3 values above everything else. We are a sustainable outcomes-oriented company. So we are outcome-based. We want to get to the result and get there as fast as possible. And we don't necessarily care about what the path is to get there, but the outcome itself must be sustainable. So any product we take on is for people and the planet and combines both. We're bold as a company. So we require everyone to be bold in some way. This manifests in totally different ways. So some people are very quiet by nature, but if you look at their experimental work, they're doing things that 9 out of 10 experiments fail, but that 10th one is worth 3x the progress of anything else. We really like to see that kind of thing. And then other people are bold in how they interact and how they project themselves. And it's completely fine. There's many different forms of that, but we want everyone to have that edge in some way. And we look for that when we're hiring. And then we have a transparency and perspective. So we're an ultra transparent company. We really believe in this, the whole radical transparency view of things. Every month, we send the output of our financials, revenue, OPEX, CAPEX, cash, and existing runway to the entire team so they can see it. There's potentially a lot of downsides of doing that. But what we've experienced is that people get a sense to really understand where the company's at, and it gives them more of a better sense of ownership that I am responsible for influencing outcomes for this company. So those are the three, kind of elements of our culture that evolved over time. And we finally, the three of us founders, after 5 years of building the company, sat down and were able to consolidate those into statements, which was a pretty cool experience because we weren't starting from a blank page and saying, what are the values of this future hypothetical organization going to be? We were actually sitting there saying, we have this team of 20 people. We've hired them based on criteria and standards and our own sense of who would be a good fit here. But how do we characterize that? And that was what we came up with. And we've stuck to that, and it's worked quite well for us. And then the last thing I'll say is that the way in which the team, I feel pretty unique, is I also included not just the team that's here every day building, but our set of investors and board members, particularly the ones that we interact closely with. We've, in multiple occasions, introduced team members to board members and vice versa, and they've built one-on-one individual relationships because there's a way that a board member can help someone's career, or there's something that somebody in our team wants to learn from a particular board member's background. Like, that's not typically normal from what I know. It doesn't disrupt at all what we need to get done. Everybody respects that, like, the board is the board, and these are the decisions the board needs to make, and these are the decisions that the company leadership needs to make, and these are the things that the team needs to do and have ownership over. But it creates this bigger sense for people on the team of, wow, like, my opportunity here is massive, and that manifests in multiple other things they do in their jobs. So that's maybe just an example of one of the ways that I've really appreciated the team. But everybody that's been a part of this thing has acted like that we're all building this together, and we've got to find a way there. And that's been very, very cool.
Love that story about transparency. I hear mixed messages about that, but looks like it's working out for you guys. Good for you. Before I go to my traditional closing questions, are there any plugins? How can people reach you, whether it is investors or future employees or anything else about the company that you want to plug in?
You can find us on LinkedIn, search our names, guessing they'll be in the title, or you can just email us at lance@nelumbo.io and liam@nelumbo.io.
Awesome. Now to my traditional closing questions. What are the couple of lessons that you guys learned that other startups could learn from? Any mistakes that others could avoid?
There's always a lot of mistakes. For me, I can talk to not just mistakes that we've made, but some I've seen as well. And I've pushed these before, is multiple founders are a good thing. A single founder to a company is hard. We did not personally do that, but I've seen many, many companies try to do that. And then I've kind of touched on this early on, is like when we started out, we really thought energy efficiency was important. So when you're talking about like big company operators, if you really look at the expenses that the head of operations of that company pays, the electric bill is not a very big percentage of that. So if I can reduce their electric bill by 30%, that's less interesting than reducing their employee overhead by like 0.1%. Manufactured numbers, but just the impact of the problem is low. It unfortunately took us longer than it should have to learn that. Right? It's those really early time period that's more valuable. You can create more value before your end financing round. The earlier you know something, the more value it is, and that value cascades through. Come in with an open mind and listen to the customers up front, but also don't do exactly what they say. Get a lot of data and then make an objective decision. As again, if you haven't noticed, we're a little naive and hard-headed in that we're selling energy efficiency and you're going to buy it type of thing. That was maybe not the best approach.
Indeed. Liam, anything from you?
I certainly agree with all of that. I would also say that the comment I made earlier about mapping out the supply chain and building your own base reality or ground truth understanding of it by conversations you or the company has had directly is super important. Finding who has, if particularly deep tech companies, who has market power in your industry. So who's the one that really sets the terms for the rest of the value chain. And then there's always one section of the value chain that typically does this. And sometimes it's obvious, but for whatever reason you think that that's not the right place to start. that probably is the right place to start, even if it seems really, really hard. Either being someone in that role that has market power or working directly with them, because everyone else gets farther out of the periphery of the industry and there's just less and less money. And then some of the harder things are like, it is better to be right about the sector or market than it is to be perfectly right about the more specific approach. It's better to pick a trend that is definitely happening and then needing to iterate a couple times on how exactly you provide value in that trend than it is to like pick a perfect problem solution in a space that just nobody's paying attention to, if you want to think about what grows the fastest. And then communication is a very common answer in this situation, but communication and learning how to communicate differently at different phases of the company is super important. If you go the direction of raising venture capital, and that's not for everybody, but if you do that, the second you raise a significant amount, say several $1 million, your job is pretty much people management and making sure that a team is executing in a certain direction, which is completely different than being an individual contributor. And it's very hard to make that change the first time for a lot of reasons. Some of them are psychological, particularly when you come from a background where you're doing research and development. So going through that is you have to be explicit that you're going to need help doing that and find people that have done that transition before. But communication is part of that, learning how to communicate effectively at the right level to the right people to achieve the outcomes that you want.
Wonderful. Thank you for those lessons. And would you like to name one or two people that played a significant role in the startup journey?
Lance Brockway. I mean, I've learned so much from him. Did you mean outside of this room?
It could be inside, outside, anywhere.
I just go into what Liam was saying earlier when he was calling out some of our earlier investors. Like when you're first starting, you'll find a lot of people that say they're willing to throw money in. But that first check, if you ever get Alon on, he's got the snowball downhill, the whole momentum thing. Once that first check hits, then it's real. The other money actually becomes money. It's just not money that people said they would give. It's money in your bank account, which is the only type of money that matters.
Indeed.
Yeah, those early investors can play a really big role, not just in their connections or introductions or whatnot, but in their support at times that are just going to be really tough early on. Like we had a couple really hard situations early on that, as we were figuring out what to do and kind of recovering from it, one of our angel investors, Jay, would show up at the office with his 2 Chihuahua dogs. And we would all sit around and try and, and I know this is classic Silicon Valley now, so everyone's rolling their eyes as I'm saying this, but it was actually super helpful. He was just there to be like, what do you guys need? How do we figure this out? Let's get all the best ideas on the table. And then, oh, by the way, here's these cute dogs in case anyone is stressed out. That was pretty cool. But I'll call out Mike Hopkins as someone that's had a huge role for us. He was an advisor early on. So Mike was the CEO of Ice Energy for about a decade. They're a grid storage company, but particularly for using the energy locked in ice in order to power air conditioners, not a lithium-ion battery per se, but an ice battery. So he understood HVAC. He was in the industry, but he was an innovator in the industry and built Ice Energy up for a period of 10 years and then moved back into the development business, doing major power plant stuff for natural gas and actually now for hydrogen. But Mike he started out as an advisor. And then after we got to know him over about 2 years, we invited him to be an independent board member of Nelumbo, has always been there for us, has made many introductions that were transformational for us, has just always rolled up his sleeves to help and build. And that's been super, super cool.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for your time. It has been fun reconnecting and learning about your startup journey. Love the bold vision, team, and technology, and good luck with the journey going forward. I'd like to bring you back once you exit very soon.
We would love that as well. Yeah, thanks for having us on, Naresh. It's been great.
Thank you so much, Naresh. Great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lab to Startup podcast. You can find links to the resources and programs mentioned in these episodes, connect with Naresh, or subscribe to this show at labtostartup.com.